That's a that's a video image of sludge being pumped into a lake that holds about 180 million tons of this stuff in the Bayan Obo mines, which are located in Mongolia in China. These mines have about 70% of the world's supply of rare earth minerals. And within that 70% of those right there, China provides 95% of what the world needs and uses. Now, if you're wondering what this has to do with artificial intelligence, well, I'm going to hopefully be able to tell you. So let's take that trip. When you think about artificial intelligence and you think about cloud computing and you think about all of what that entails, you have to realize that everything starts with sometimes the most simplistic of things, water. Data centers require water for cooling. If you Google this, you'll find that the major houses of AI, right? That great houses of AI. Google has 35 data centers, more or less. Amazon over 125. Microsoft has a couple of hundred. And there are over 1,800 independent data centers throughout the entirety of the United States. These all need to be cooled because these data centers, which are just big, giant buildings filled with even bigger, more giant machines, servers, these are generating a lot of heat and they have to be cooled. And the way you cool them is with water. And so without the cooling properties of the water, those data centers could not operate. And if they couldn't operate, we wouldn't have, arguably, the internet. So what does mining and sludge have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, as it turns out, the electronics that we all love to play with, our iPhones and all these other things, computer servers, they need these specialized minerals and materials, et cetera, to be able to operate correctly. The reason why this is important is because you can look at mining, which as early as the 1500s was spoken of in the following way: greater detriment from mining than value of the metals obtained from mining. Was a comment about this from a guy called Georgios Agricol, who was, I suppose, a philosopher of the times. When you look at mining, it's like making the sausage. Nobody wants to see how it's actually accomplished. And yet, with that, we still eat the sausage. Well, with mining, the things that we have in our cars and our phones and our jewelry and whatever, well, that all has to be mined. No one wants to know the true cost of it. According to research, mining is only profitable because it is not, as an industry, required to pay for, if you will, the actual cost of the mining process. Human costs, environmental costs, etc., are all ignored. And the only cost that is anyone would know is cared about is, oh, the mining system cost X and we made Y. But that doesn't really cover the true cost of mining itself, right? Let's transition from that sort of into, I don't know, how about Tesla and batteries? You know that Tesla uses 1/2 of the world's supply of lithium in batteries? 1/2. 28,000 tons of lithium hydroxide every year. And there's a limited supply of lithium worldwide, both in a daily measurement and in sum total around the entire world. And these minerals and metals that we use to power our servers and our data centers and everything else were formed over millions and millions and millions of years of Earth geology. And we're just trucking through them like we can just go make new ones, which we better hope we'd be able to. If for some reason the world supply of lithium for making batteries disappeared, who would make batteries? Do we have another tech? I'm sure we must, because if we rely totally on lithium for the creation of lithium batteries and we ran out of lithium, we would have a big problem, right? The cloud, which serves as the fundamental building block of artificial intelligence, lives on things like lithium. And the mines in Bolivia and in Indonesia, and with tin in Indonesia especially, and Western African deserts, where this mining is done, no one sees these places. The video we saw at the very beginning of today's Privacy of Me podcast and videocast, which if you missed, Google Oban mines, Bayan Obo mines in Mongolia, or go to pond5.com, which is a video service. That's where I obtained the video. It's disgusting, but that's the real cost of mining for these minerals that we use in all of these tech products. The 17 rare earth minerals that are so heavily used by high tech. They all start with the mining process. And is that cost recognized, right? So we have mining, and we move into things like we're talking with Bayan Obo and this horrible disgusting strip mining of the earth. And you look at the number of data centers and the amount of electricity. This is the underlying, and if you'd like, hidden cost of creating the cloud computing systems and the powerful machines that we use for crunching data, creating algorithms, etc. This is where it all starts, is with the underlying mining stuff. I have no problem with electric cars. I think they're great. They're fun to be in, that's for sure. But I always have to laugh just a little when people comment about how electric cars are saving the planet. When you look at the actual electric car and the power it uses, they wind up being more detrimental to the planet than the fossil fuels that would have been used had it been a gas vehicle. But, they look better once they're on the road, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. Let's keep going onto the data centers and then into artificial intelligence. Now, as mining is to cloud computing, the creation of data sets are to artificial intelligence. And let's start at the very beginning. As a general overview, from one layman to the listening or viewing layperson, what is artificial intelligence? What is facial recognition technology? Let's start there. That's easy. Facial recognition technology is the ability of a system to recognize me, my face, right? Just start there. If I walk into a room and there's facial recognition, let's say I am in a man trap entrance where I've come in the first door and it closes, and the system has to recognize me as me to open the second door. So there's a camera and it looks and it sees me and it compares me to a database and says, yep, that's who that person is, right? Facial recognition. You can layer complexity with this as we change the scenario. Can we pick that individual person out of a crowd where there's dozens and dozens or hundreds of faces? Okay. Can we start to ascertain certain characteristics? For example, is the person have light skin or dark skin? Is the person possessed of a luscious head of hair, or like me, none, or virtually none? Is it a man or a woman? Are they old or young? These are all part and parcel of facial recognition. Now, how do you teach a system to recognize a human face? Think about that for just a second. You can't just show it one picture. The system has to be trained to recognize a human face. That means that the data that comprises the data set for training, as we refer to it, is millions upon millions of pictures that are essentially shown to this machine. Here's a face, here's another face, here's another face, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And your artificial intelligence and the algorithms that go with it learn. They learn what is and is not a face, and then they can start to apply it. And as they get things right, you got it right. If you get it wrong, you correct the programming, and off it goes. Now, here's where it starts to get really, really scary as well as interesting. It's one thing for facial recognition to say that is Scott. It's another thing to say that's Scott in a crowd. The information that was used to train the AIs is millions and millions of, like I said, random faces that were pulled down and categorized prior to showing them to a machine. Think about what I just said. They had to be categorized. What does that mean? Well, what that means is you can't show the AI a picture of a male without an explanation. You can't just say dead silence and have it figured out. You have to categorize the image that you're showing to the machine so that it can learn what it is. So if all you're trying to do is train the machine to recognize Scott, you have to show it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of me, but every single one of them has to be labeled, this is Scott. Now, imagine you're trying to teach the system to recognize the difference between pale skin and tan skin, or a Caucasian skin tone versus a Hispanic skin tone. Who decides the line that is the demarc between light-skinned and tan-skinned? These images have to be categorized. So you have to tell the system, this is a person with light colored skin. The next one is a person with olive complexion skin. But who makes that choice is where this starts to get fascinating. The categorizations that are done for, or have been done for this and are continually done for this, are done by human beings who work for these massive companies. And I don't mean the Googles and Amazons of the world. I'm talking about companies you've never heard of who bid on this type of categorization work. It's literally human beings sitting in cubicles, one would assume, or at a table, looking at an image and categorizing it, putting a name to the face of the image. So ostensibly, there could be someone sitting in the Philippines or wherever whose job it is to look at picture after picture after picture and categorize each one. And it is their work that winds up creating the training data set that is used by artificial intelligence to be taught to recognize, as we've been discussing, a person's face or my face or whatever, right? So with that said, with the face being the first example, it's not terribly complicated. But the more complexity that you add in, man, woman, young, old, hair color, the more training has to be done, which means more categorization, which means people creating the categories and deciding what goes into each category. That's an objective measure, is it not? if everyone agrees that one foot metro, one US foot is 12 inches, then that's not an objective measurement. We all have agreed a pound is a pound, a foot is a foot, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to light skinned, dark skinned, short hair, long hair, these are not objective, these are subjective interpretations. This is a person deciding all by themselves, hey, you know what? I think that this person has light colored skin, and that's what I'm going to put in my report or in my categorization, that they have light colored skin. Okay. But the next person in line says, wait a minute, that's not true. They actually have really dark colored skin. Or I see it as dark colored skin or whatever. Either way, it is not objective. It's subjective. Now, think about that for just a second. Kind of let that sink in, because it gets even more interesting as we start to walk backwards, right? So, and pardon me, I have my giant notebook here. I just destroyed it. My little thing of notes for our podcasts. And go back to, so we're talking about facial recognition. We're talking about this creation of databases and whatnot. And our lovely NIST, NIST, maintained and created, in fact, the very first facial database to be used for the training of artificial intelligence. Where did they come up with the information? Where did they get the information? Well, the attempt by people to use photography and faces to determine all kinds of crazy stuff predates the cars, maybe even horseback. But in this particular case, the real explosion of artificial intelligence has come along with what? With what? The explosion of social media, because from the beginning of social media as we knew it, and all of the services and systems that allowed us to post photos and put up tweets and all the rest of it, we uploaded a gazillion photographs as a world community, right? We were going crazy. Oh, look, Mom, it's me and my new cat. And companies scraped every one of those photos, and they became the basis for the original databases used in facial recognition. We gave it away. Hey, side note, every time you see a reCAPTCHA, you know that thing where it says, to prove you're human, identify all the bicycles in the photo. You know what that actually is used for? That's used to train AIs. You are, as a free service, categorizing data for whoever uses the reCAPTCHA. Because when you say that's a bicycle, if it is a bicycle, then it can be shown to an AI for training as a categorized image. Get that? And you're doing it for free. So you go way, 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 way back to the beginning of the internet, which is funny to say because it was the beginning of the internet's one thing, but Facebook was founded in 2006, I believe. And I forget who was before that, MySpace or whatever. But you had these databases that were created by companies who simply scraped the internet for photography. And they ripped down photographs of me and of you and of everyone we know. And they used those to create the very first databases of images for facial recognition, right? AI is not smart enough to know the difference between two things. Just so you know, you have to teach it. If I teach my artificial intelligence to recognize apples by showing the artificial intelligence, a million photographs of red apples, what does it do if it sees a green one? It knows an apple's not an orange, but it wouldn't recognize a green apple as an apple unless I had told it a green apple is an apple, right? So you have to tell it everything. I'm looking for a piece here here we go. There we have it right here. So you had taking a step back to FRT, facial recognition. The Department of Defense steps in with something called FERT, F-E-R-E-T, facial recognition technology, where they stepped in and got 350 million or so photos, around 500 million tweets, and created something called ImageNet. ImageNet was unveiled on the world in 2006. And all this went up there, and it was used for the creation of facial recognition training databases. Again, that's the ImageNet. In 2009, something north of 3 billion photos were put up on Flickr. Now, the original ImageNet, so I have this giant pile of photography, and it's filled with photographs. And just use your imagination. It's filled with photographs of everything you can think of. Not just faces, cars, cats, dogs, airplanes, guitars, rocket engines, whatever, it doesn't matter. But to an AI, it is all nonsense. Because unlike you or I, it doesn't have any intuitive knowledge or historical knowledge of what a car looks like or whatever. So you have to teach it. Now, why do I bring this up again? Because ImageNet worked with ImageNet worked with Amazon Digital Turk to structure image data. Amazon gets a pat on the back for thumbing their nose at all of us in the following way. The term mechanical Turk refers to a contraption that was built where it appeared that a computerized system, it would have looked like magic at this time in the world, was able to play a card game and win. I think it was a card game. It was a man inside of a machine doing all the work, and they hit it so well that no one could tell, which I think is really, really funny. What's funnier is Amazon's system is called Digital Turk. You know what it is? It's people just like you and me who are sitting around looking at pictures and going, that's a this, and this is a that, and that's a this. Except ImageNet had one tiny little problem. They created categories to structure data, which does not, as a statement of fact, sound like a big deal. Oh, who cares? They created categories. Apples, alcoholic. Ape man was one of them. Crazy was one of them. Hooker was one of them. Okay. That in and of itself is bad. But you know what's worse? Who decides what is what? Think about that for me for just a second. Who decides what is what? Meaning, who got to decide what images went into the category for alcoholic or hooker or crazy or angry or whatever? People did. And if you're worried, I am going somewhere with all of this. People categorized the data, which was then used to train an AI, which means that a room full of human beings making a small amount of money and whose job it was to categorize an image into a bucket so it could be given to an AI to say, every image you see in this bucket is a crazy person. The AI learned what it was given to learn. And people decided what went into what category. That is where our artificial intelligence and facial recognition ultimately comes from. It's not the same as saying, I want to be able to tell the difference between a human and anything else, or even a man and a woman, man or a woman. The more you ask of the system, the more complexity it creates and the more categorization that you have to do. And the more categorization, the more human involvement you get. Think about it. If I want you to tell the difference between a human and a horse, that's easy. If I want you to teach an AI the difference between 10 different types of humans, They have to be categorized, and some person has to make the decision on what goes into each category. That starts to get into the layer of complexity behind AI. And when you realize that people were behind that, you can immediately see not only the flaws, but the failings of that type of system. There was one individual whose name escapes me at the moment, who traveled under a Department of Defense grant to Papua New Guinea, because he believed that human emotion was a physical characteristic that could be recognized universally. In other words, a laugh on my face would be recognized as such by every other culture, including this one particular culture in Papua New Guinea who had been effectively cut off from modernization. Well, he went out and he ran his tests and he failed. And he did it again and he still failed. Did not give up on his theory. And in fact, his theory became part of the foundation for the unscientific and lacking any proof ideals behind such things as behavior recognition. But staying on point, he believed that there were basic, I believe it wound up to something like 50 micro expressions that you could see on the human face. All this means is you could teach a computer to recognize a person's emotional state. Categorization matters. Here's why. Facial recognition and behavioral recognition, or emotion recognition, let's call it, emotive analysis, has been trialed in airports. And what it was purported to do was recognize, for example, a person who was planning on blowing up a plane or hijacking a plane because they would look nervous or stressed out or whatever. And it failed miserably for a sort of an obvious reason. You might look at my face and you might say, my gosh, he looks stressed. You know what you can't say? Why I'm stressed. I could be stressed because I just got diagnosed with a really bad disease. I could be stressed because I just won the lottery and couldn't figure out how to keep it hidden from everyone who was going to ask for money. You don't know. And you're lacking context, which is a critical part of how humans understand each other's emotional states. A person who is upset and nervous and stressed and sweating could be that way because of bad news they had just received, not because they were planning some sort of nefarious event. In order to get an AI to recognize the emotional state of a person, would forget the leap of logic for a second. You'd have to train that AI to recognize hundreds of thousands of categories of emotion. And how do you train that AI to understand context, nuance? We can't overestimate the amount of overselling that this industry has done. Facial recognition technology, which we'll just stay on for the moment, is fantastic when I'm looking to tell you something like how many people were in your store, or how many men versus women, or how many old people versus young people. But it kind of stops dead right around that point. You can't teach an AI to recognize why I'm angry, and it's arguable whether or not you can teach it to recognize anger, because anger has to be shown as a categorized image, which means a person decided the category. And as a grander point here, the use of any sort of artificial intelligence in a straight data system, yay, good for you. Statistical analysis or regression, looking at, although this has its own problems, employee scheduling or whatever. But outside of that, it does not deliver this incredible panacea. All it does is it takes all of the nuance of humanity and time and location and all these really hard to describe and nebulous things, and tries to boil them down into ones and zeros. Categorization. It has to be categorized. And anything it can't categorize, it's just going to dump, because it has no way to know what it represents. So if you can't categorize it, and if you can categorize it, that categorization has been done by a human being. And if a human being has done the categorization, it means that if you think that a certain expression on a certain person represents a certain thought process, you think about what I'm saying. I think a woman in a burqa who is weeping is always about to do something terrible. So I'm going to create this category, terrorist. I'm going to put that in it. Every picture that goes in it, you have effectively taught your AI that if you see a female wearing a burqa crying, she's a terrorist, because you have to categorize the data. That's why it is so continually critical for all of us to understand and to work within the parameters of what we're doing and exposing whether or not it works and why and how and where all this information comes from. Facial recognition technologies are great for limited things, but if someone tells you they can use them to recognize someone as about to commit a crime, they are not telling you the truth, because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. The LAPD had, or still does, I'm assuming, CalGang. It's a database of records. They had, this whole giant facial recognition database where they categorized it, like we've been talking about. 23% of the records in it were incorrect, were inaccurately categorized. They had 42 babies in it. And even worse, most of the adults in the database had never been charged with a crime. And if they were in the database, they couldn't be removed. Well, how is that database going to give anything resembling accurate information if the information that it was given was inaccurate out of the gate? It would tag people as gang members for things as simple as wearing a red shirt while they were standing out on their porch. And once you were in the gang database. Then what happens? We can only imagine, right? Data and its associated, structured and unstructured formats. When we started uploading stuff into the internet, it was all public. And the way it was used was public. And over the last 20 years, or closing in on 20 years, to be fair. Data's become private. The data that we see and the data that we use, and more importantly, the data that is used and then we're told what it's doing, it's become increasingly private and proprietary. It didn't used to be that way. All that data used to be public. And now if you and I take the same 10 million photographs, we can create two completely proprietary models, which are totally private to us. And actually you can get different results. Once it's privatized, we don't have any idea how it's used or under what auspice it's used or by whom. We don't. And it allows for things like the vigilance of the world. Anyone know of or remember Vigilance? So here's a company that puts up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of license plate recognition cameras, LPR cameras. And they're just recording, capturing license plates, and then selling the data to law enforcement when required. One of the scariest things I read in researching this particular podcast was this. So let's take the Austin Police Department. And I only say the Austin Police Department because I'm sitting in Austin. They are not allowed by law to randomly collect and store license plates on vehicles. A license plate is a piece of personally identifiable information because it's tied to your car's registration and ultimately to you. They are not allowed to do it, but you know what they can do? Buy it from someone. So if the Austin Police Department decides they want to try to, catch me at whatever, it doesn't matter. They could go to Vigilant and say, hey, we would like to buy information about all the cars that traveled in these particular areas between these particular dates. Not against the law at all. Vigilant took pictures of you and me and our cars and our license plates without permission, and then sat on them, waiting for the perfect time to sell them to a law enforcement agency, or doesn't matter. They took public data and made it private and made a profit, or attempted to make a profit off of it. Think about what I just said. Think about what I just said. No matter how law and order you might be, think about the idea that a third-party company, unrelated to any part of your existence, grabbing a hold of your license plate and just sitting on it and then giving it up to whoever asks for money. That belongs to you. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you and to me. And you can start to kind of roll out from the vigilance of the world. I mean, we've talked about Palantir in the past, and how they have kind of worked to create a bit of a surveillance state everywhere they've gone. But I mean, Amazon Ring and sharing of the neighborhood app and all these other things, it's the privatization of public data. And it's scary because of that statement, because we're taking data that is public, making it private, and then not telling people what's being done with it. Vigilant wanted access to Department of Public Safety records in multiple states, asked for it so they could put it into their database records, ostensibly tie it to license plates. I often think of the UK as the birthplace of GDPR. I don't know if it was or wasn't, but I do know that until public outcry stopped it, the National Institutes of Health were negotiating with Google to deliver millions of patient records without the patient's consent in the UK, by the way. I don't know about UK health record laws, but I know how they are here, and that's a no-no. But Google was cheerfully working with them. We'd all like to think that Google is not one of the naysayers or the bad players within the industry. But again, public data, in this case, it was private data because it belonged to you and me, our health records, sold by the very organization, I should correct myself, just under discussions to be sold by an organization who was rule bound to keep it private. What is happening to our data? What is happening when companies can collect as much public as they want, make it private, and then not tell us what they're doing with it? It's IBM helping the apartheid regime in South Africa when it still existed, because they built them a racial classification database. Daniel Elkman was the name, by the way, of the guy who is considered the father of affect recognition. And yeah, I don't want to skip over what I just said. Yes, IBM, good old Watson, helped the apartheid government of South Africa develop a racial classification database. If you read the most recent blog post in perspectives, you will notice that the topic of said was, profit and ethics. And who in IBM thought it was a great idea to help an apartheid regime? How did they justify that? How did they decide that it was okay for that to happen? Who at ImageNet thought that having a category of photos called Ape Man, which it's long since been taken care of, would be a good idea to be put in? 2 years ago at one of the ISC shows, I remember laughing as I read about a company, I believe from Japan, who claimed that they had a shoplifting prediction algorithm that could detect when someone was actually going to shoplift. BS. There may not be enough computational power in the world to do that, but that's besides the point. The more important point is, in order for a system to learn how to recognize a shoplifter, you'd have to teach it what a shoplifter was. And unless, I suppose arguably you could say, okay, I'm going to take my AI and I'm going to show it images and videos of people taking things off of a store shelf and putting them in their pocket, which even that doesn't necessarily mean they're shoplifting. Maybe they don't have a cart, but let's go with it. Even if you did that, okay, so you have this narrow category, which would be remember, it's all ones and zeros, if thens, if product is put into the pocket, then that's a shoplifter. But if we could collect that many pictures of shoplifters, we'd have really bad shoplifters, which means you have to categorize images. So let's say you go buy a bunch of mug shots. I've created the world's largest facial recognition training database of mug shots, of shoplifter mug shots. And mug shots, unhappily, have been used extensively in the creation of facial recognition training sets. So now I'm going to take this grouping of images that I collected from mugshots that I have categorized as being shoplifters. And that's what I teach my AI to recognize as a shoplifter. And I'm not being silly when I say this. Let's say that we decided to teach the AI that anyone who had one eye closed in an image was a shoplifter. It would immediately peg everyone that did that as a shoplifter, because it can only learn based on what it's taught. So you have to look differently at all of these things. You have to understand that when companies like ours develop facial recognition and, more importantly, facial anonymization, and make a significant effort to maintain metadata recognition without recognizing the person, we do it because of this. We do it because if you can keep data as anonymous to the individual as possible, you can still gain insight from the data without erroneously categorizing the person within the image. If you see this video cast, or if you listen to this podcast and you own a business that has been approached to purchase some sort of we can tell if type of analytic, or if you own a company or you work for a company who purports to have such an analytic, that latter category, send me an email and I will have you on the next podcast and you can try to explain how you're the only company in the world that can make this work. And if you're being approached, stop the approach and tell the people it doesn't work. It doesn't work. How did you categorize the imagery that you used to decide a person was an X? Now you can start to understand why facial recognition databases are historically biased against minorities. Because if the people doing the categorization are biased against minorities, guess what shows up in the training set? Minority bias. AI, machine learning, subset of AI. And the things that it's going to bring to our world are just astounding. And there will be benefits that make us all thankful we were born and raised and are alive during this time. But don't let yourself get starry-eyed over what people tell you it can do when you have logical reasons why it can't be done. Elkman's affect recognition science, air quotes, not that he was a bad guy, has no scientific basis in fact. It is unproven science. Just like the company that has sold to somewhere over 100 law enforcement agencies a system that purports to tell guilt from innocence based on the voice of a person calling 911. I'm not making that up either. How? How did you train your AI to tell the difference between someone stressed out over some sort of horrible crime incident in their house and they're freaking out over someone who has the same thing happen and is in a flat affect? Be aware of what all this kind of stuff is, and look to the simplistic to give you the answers that you want. Again, Deeping Source, my company, our company has facial recognition technologies, and we have gaze tracking, etc. Gaze tracking, I'm sorry to our CEO, it's actually attention tracking. With attention tracking, we can give you an idea of where someone is looking. I can't tell you why they're looking there. I can only tell you they look there. I can show you a video of a guy walking down a street where there's sidewalk cafe style doors. And, kind of looks over his shoulder at one and kind of looks at the next one and looks ahead and kind of looks across the other street. I don't know why he's looking anywhere. I just know he is looking somewhere. If I show you he looks at a particular sign and looks down and looks away, looks at the sign and then walks in the store, I can't even tell you if he walked in the store because of the sign. I can only tell you that he looked at the sign, looked away, looked at the sign, walked in the store. I imagine that part of the reason that we rose to the top of the food chain was because of the ability, and we're not the only ones that have it. If you don't believe me, you can meet my dogs, to understand contextual nuances, those little tiny bits of information that surround every situation that we use to create a picture of the entire scene, right? If we allow the network around us, the virtual world around us, to shrink everything down to an if-then problem of 1 and 0, then we will have no one to blame but ourselves for removing all of that subtlety and all of that contextual nuance from our lives. If you think I'm wrong, if you have great credit, go find someone that doesn't. Have we ever in our lives said, boy, that credit score system is fair, or boy, getting a loan is fair? Why? Yeah, I'll end on this. 20 years ago, living in Houston, Texas, I called my banker. I said, Alan, I want to buy a car. And he said, okay, go buy a car. And I said, okay, but don't I need to fill out papers or whatnot? He said, well, I know how much you make. And what are you thinking of spending on the car? Or how much do you want to spend a month? And I don't remember what I said. But his point, he said, okay, just go buy the car. I picked out the car. The loan paperwork and stuff was done effectively by the bank. You know who made the loan decision? My banker, a human. He knew me. He'd had dinner with me. We had sat on a board of directors together, etc. Find me a place that happens today that isn't, rural East nowhere in Montana or something. Well, the same thing is happening in the sense of, I mentioned credit scores and whatnot. We all want to be able to say, okay, I know I missed the payment, but, or that's not me, or I was getting a divorce at the time, or whatever. Nope, sorry, it's a score. It's a score. And by the way, we're not really going to tell you how the score works. We want you to have to, guess or worry or whatever. If we let the entirety of the world become ones and zeros, then we're in trouble. You and I and our kids, the privacy of me is all about the recognition of the space in between the 1 and the 0. That's where the subtlety and the nuance lives. I am very excited because in the next few Privacy of Me podcasts, we're going to be having a lovely discussion with William McKnight, who is arguably one of the leading commentators on artificial intelligence, its application. He has spoken at events ranging from Microsoft conferences to TED, etc. And we're going to embark on a really interesting kind of 3-part, if you will, but we're going to talk about, the good sides of artificial intelligence, the bad sides of artificial intelligence. Then we're going to talk about the future. And there will be multiple futures of artificial intelligence. It's going to be fascinating. Bill is to say that he's an intelligent individual would be insulting to intelligent individuals, but I'm very excited to have him on over the next couple of weeks. Until then, look at this stuff with a critical eye. And if it sounds like it's too good to be true, or there's no real way it could work, it probably doesn't. I'm Scott Sereboff of Deeping Source, and this has been The Privacy of Me. Look forward to talking to you again.